going to do that order unless.
I may have.
But that's it. You're upstairs. We'll change. Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. If we haven't met so far, I'm James Kirkup. I'm the director of the Social Market Foundation. You are here, I hope you know, for this fringe event organised by the Social Market Foundation and our friends at Policy at Manchester, the impact wing, limb of Manchester University. Which conveys the academic wonder of Manchester University into the policymaking sphere. So we're here today to talk about the digital revolution, better work in the creative industries. Before we get on to the topic and the panel, just some housekeeping. I'm looking for, there it is, the camera there. Back there's a camera which is live streaming this event to the infinite internet. I think we're going out onto YouTube as we speak. Is that right? Excellent. We are all YouTube stars now. So when we get to the Q&A, to conversation, just bear in mind that you're not just talking to people in the room, you're also talking to cyberspace, and that everything you say will be recorded online forever. I think that's the only important bit of housekeeping. There's a fire escape at the back of the room. There are no fire drills planned this morning, so if lights and whistles go off, it is real. Just head that way, please. That's I think all in terms of logistics. I'm not going to I will not talk for terribly long because everybody on this panel knows far more about the subject than I do. Nor am I going to give you the comic biographies of our speakers. I'm going to let them embarrass themselves by telling you how clever and wonderful they all are. If you've seen the running order, we're actually going to slightly change the running order. We're going to kick off with Alison McGovern, who is the Shadow Minister for Digital Culture, Media, Sport, and all things nice, because she's not actually very nice. And she's going to run away and leave us before we actually finish. So, boo. But with that, she's all right, really. With that, we'll go to good Hallie, and then we will hear from Greenhill. Jamie and Helen will get the last word before we hear from all of you, and hopefully, I think from Twitter. I think what hashtag are we using this morning? Sorry, we've been having people submitting questions to fringe events from Twitter this week. It's been marvelous, very modern.
Yeah, we've got a Slido link come up on our SMF Twitter account.
There's a Slido link on the SMF Twitter account.
Wow.
So
I don't even know what that means.
I'm glad you don't know what a Slido link is. Yeah, you talk. Ali.
I mean, one day we might have Slido links in Parliament. One day in about 2043. Anyway, can everybody hear me okay? The mic should be picking it up. Okay, but it's lovely to be here in Brighton with an absolutely fantastic panel. I just want to say a few scene-setting things. The idea of better work in the digital and creative sector is really, really important. But I think there's some context around that on how the creative industries are changing and should change to set the scene. And obviously, creative industries is one thing. I'm sure Jamie will talk about music, also film, gaming, and other things. But what occurs to me more than anything else is how relevant creative skills are to the whole economy. So I hope that what I'm going to say actually applies to the whole economy, not just what we might think of as traditionally, the creative people making things, that are to do with their ideas, rather than to do with items. So we do need to focus on better work. I mean, it is the Labour Party conference. I think I'm contractually obliged to say that. And I'll say a few things about what I think that means and what that looks like. But the industry is going through a massive period of change, even without COVID. We've seen the role of the really big players, the kind of utilities of the creative sector, the Googles and Amazons. We've seen their role really solidify. And this is my first point. I think competition really matters. I think it really matters to creative industries because I think new ideas are the lifeblood of the creative industries. And I worry that partly because of the way that Brexit and the discussion of that happened, and partly just because we haven't really talked about competition in the economy for some time. I worry that we're behind where we should be in terms of making sure that we have a good competitive playing field for people in the creative industries to succeed on. And what I mean by that is, frankly, if you're creating something that's a digital tool or a piece of digital output, you are quite beholden to some really serious big players. And I worry that whilst in America, they obviously have the courts are dealing with this issue, and in the European Union, regulation will deal with this issue. That our Competition and Markets Authority has great intentions, but does it have the power or resources to really take on those big beasts in favour of our small creative businesses? Because out there's a lot of innovative, brilliant people who at the moment I think are a bit hamstrung by the situation that they face. And I think we need to develop our thinking on how we can support better competition in creative industries, a more competitive environment. Second point, rebalancing really matters. Do not expect me to say the LU words. You know what I mean, right? But bit of politics for you. That phrase, that levelling up phrase, is Tory nonsense that was invented in CCHQ to say that when the Treasury decides to fund shrubs in tubs in a small town centre in the north of England, that is economic rebalancing, to which I say, nonsense. Proper economic rebalancing means identifying growing areas of our economy and making sure that those regions that need to improve in productivity growth and contribute more to our economic activity in the country, that those industries are supported to grow in those areas. Now, creative industries were the fastest growing part of our economy prior to the pandemic. And if you're here because you care about the creative industries, I really hope that you also care about the regions of our country that have a lot to offer economically. What that means is making sure that our regional mayors and our devolved institutions have policy-making powers that can support the creative industries. And, where I'm from, Merseyside, we have a fantastic music board that is doing just that, because we want to maintain Liverpool's preeminence as the global music city that it is. But there's a whole host of other examples. And I know from whether it's, documentaries in South Yorkshire or the role that South Wales is playing in our creative output, that creative industries should be point number one on anybody's rebalancing strategy. Final point, I'm going to come to the quality work bit, because those are the foundations. Now, what should jobs be like in creative industries? Well, this is a massive question, and actually I'm going to let others speak in a second, but I would just flag 2 points with you: entry and progression. Because we know that statistically speaking, it's much harder for people from working class backgrounds, or from people from diverse backgrounds, or from people who just don't know anyone who works in the creative industries. Frankly, if you don't know anyone who's ever worked for an orchestra or a film company, where do you even begin? And so we know that those points of entry are really difficult, and that's why the more that we can do with apprenticeships and other things, the better. But then once we've got people into the industry, my big question, and I think this is harder than entry in a way, is how do they become senior? How do they actually create a career path? And I think we're only at the beginning of that conversation, particularly when we consider women and having babies, because all of the evidence shows that women compete incredibly well with men. right across the economy until they have a kid. So improve entry, figure out progression, deal with the child penalty, I think has got to be the beginning of the conversation. But James, I'm going to shut up there and let people more expert than me talk.
Thank you very much, Ali. If you were staying, I would demand that you talk more about all of your points. I think your point on competition policy is a very interesting one. Definitely something to develop. So I think you might come back to the SMF and talk about that at some point in the future. But I'm now going to hand over, as due to resume the original running order, Anita Greenhill of Manchester Business School, who can tell us more about where those jobs are, how they work, and how they have changed and might further change.
Thank you. So good morning, everybody. My name's Anita Greenhill. I work at the University of Manchester. I don't only do that, so I'm not here only as an academic voice. I also want to explain that I'm a band music manager. I manage a band called Sensanya and the Kajmore Family, a West African world music band. And I want to begin by giving you a little bit of an experience that I've recently had as a band manager. So I have to admit, my partner is the lead singer. So he has been a African ballet dancer and composer for some 20, 30, a long time. The band that he works with is full of professionals, one or two not so highly trained or skilled creatives, but it's an 8-piece band. So it's a large band, quite with ballet composition parts to it. So recently I was contacted by a very well-known Manchester booking agent promoter for the band to give a support to an international act. He began to negotiate the fee, and he said, what does the band usually charge? And I said, well, minimum £500 to £700 because it's a large group. And he said, oh, we're not even in the same ballpark. I was going to offer, if I tell you the cost, it will be an insult. The band that does the support will get £50.
What?
So for an 8-piece band, that would be £6.25.
Oh my God.
Not covering their petrol, not covering the rehearsals, not covering in a drop the intellectual component or the creative property component. So we can talk about skill sets, but we can see that the inequality in the creative industry is rife. So if I just step a little bit back, the industry itself created 5.3 million jobs in 2018, spanning sports grassroots organisations right through to super Hollywood computers, the big football productions, everything that we see. So we can see even at its foundation, it's very just dispersed. In 2018, it contributed £224 billion to our gross economy. So it is, as Alison mentioned, a very high earning industry. And I want to now back up one point that Alison said. I wanted to bring 5 points, 5 recommendations to start to address this skills issue. The creative skill set is vital, important for the redressing of some of the inequalities. First, therefore, I'd like to recommend to dig deeper into the specific cultural industries themselves. Who are they and where are they located? Does anyone know that Yorkshire has a growing Hollywood film industry? They've just had millions of pounds injected into the region. Nothing is particularly documented about what the Yorkshire history and culture is like. So this needs to be done quite immediately and quite quickly. But also it needs to include some sort of explanation and definition of what creative skill sets are. There is some work being done in that area by the DCMS and the Treasury's Green Book, where they've started to look and understand cultural and heritage skills, and good news, offer a couple of apprenticeships recently. So all this is good, but I think more needs to be done because we can see existing barriers in relation to growth and employment in phases, as Alison also said, but in regions. Secondly, I'd like to recommend identifying core common grounds and goals that the industry can work to, individuals can work to, these that can truly distribute resources. There's a big problem with funding leads to more funding, and there's reports indicating in the creative industries it's rife. So I'd recommend that we need to reassess and review the distribution of the cultural recovery funds. They're a little bit stuck trying to reinstall with those who are in power. So if we're going to be addressing inequalities by the big industries, this needs to be looked at. We have rife problems with the charity sector in the creative industries and how that's operating, and how financial returns are even dealt with. So there's a lot of work done in the black market. So this has to be explored and understand a bit more. Thirdly, I'd like to identify the associated training. Once we know where we have skills lacking, cultural hubs, how do we improve that for a long-term planning for the future, as Alison said, to enter the market and to progress in the industry. There has to be understandings of the trainings necessary. And I really emphasize digital training and skills, the coupling of creative and digital. The UK is at the forefront in many areas, but we're losing the financial and the creative capital associated with it. So a very emergency redress of that needs to happen. And I also agree with Alison, and I think that this associated training needs to be targeted at building long-term regional developments, understanding the differences between the urban and the rural. How can we understand place in relation to how resources and creative areas are flourishing? And then lastly, I'd like to talk about levelling up, not the right word, but rebalancing, if we're going to call it that. So the only way that we can rebalance is to address the workforce, because the workforce underpins the success of the industry. So by addressing what skills are needed, what creative development can happen, where it's happening, and then balancing it with the education packages that are already in existence. Key stage 4, how do we know what allows you to progress? And if I close with coming back to my own personal experience, my partner, as I said, is a trained African ballet performer with many years' experience. He cannot draw on that experience because there's no understanding what an African ballet composer does. If I asked you, would you know what it is? But it is a big theatre production where they can do fire breathing, they compose the dances. None of this is understood within the UK context. The diversity and beauty of the industry that we have needs to be understood so people can progress. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anita. We're next going to hear from Jamie and Njoku-Goodwin it's not the Department of Health. Sorry, Jamie and I have known each other for a long time, and I knew him in his previous job, but he's now he's escaped. That's exactly the word. He's escaped from government and is now running UK music, and so he will talk to you about UK music and not the pandemic, I hope, or possibly both. Who knows? Jamie.
Thank you very much. I think when we're thinking about this question of how do we see the opportunity of the digital revolution, my first question is actually what's the digital future going to look like? It's fascinating looking back over the past 10 years, looking at skills plans, looking at strategies, and they always seem to present solutions and policies for the last 5 years and not the next 10, not the next 15. So I always think the starting point is what is the digital future actually going to be? Because the past 18 months have been incredibly disruptive. We've seen all sorts of digital innovations which have come from nowhere, arguably. Historically, you normally have an innovation which comes through, it emerges, people are a little bit skeptical, starts to be taken up more widely, it scales, and it can sometimes take 10, 15 years for it to actually get on the map. In this pandemic, suddenly people weren't able to perform live. They had to switch towards live streaming, all sorts of ways of reaching audiences and engaging with audiences that they'd never really thought of doing before. And actually across the sector, not just in the music industry, in theatre, in live performance, people really took it on with gusto. But they didn't do it because they thought, right, live streaming is now going to be the alternative to live performance. It was live streaming is the only way we can actually be performing. It's the only way we can be reaching our audience. And so they adopted these new innovations. They adopted these new ways of doing things. And as we're starting to emerge from the pandemic, touch wood, there's a big question about actually these innovations that we've seen in the past 18 months, which one's going to stay? Which one's going to go? What are the things we're going to be continuing to see in the digital landscape and in the creative industries landscape over the next 10, 15 years? And what are the ones which are just going to recede and not be particularly important? And it's a really quite ferocious debate. There are some people who hate live streaming. There are some people who kind of see it as this thing they were forced to do when they couldn't perform live, and they now see it as this anathema thing they never ever want to do again. And they'll get very angry at me even suggesting that it might be part of the future landscape. And there are others who actually, they find it quite enjoyable. They thought, actually, this is a good way of me being able to reach new audiences. There's an orchestra I was having a conversation with about this, who was saying pre-pandemic, the closest they'd ever got to a film and live stream a concert was just on someone's phone, taking a few videos of it. And they've now managed to find a way to be performing high quality professionalism, recordings, live streams, where they've now got an audience base in China, they've now got an audience base in Korea, they've now got an international audience base. And even as they've gone back to doing live performances, they're now looking at how they can do it hybrid. They're now looking at how they can continue these innovations. So it varies to an extent, but there is need to consider that question of actually what is the future going to be looking like. Because if we're not preparing our workforce or preparing our infrastructure for where we're going to be in 5 or 10 years' time, we're going to find ourselves behind. It's the way they do it in Germany, it's what they do in Korea. We seem to be a country that looks backwards rather than looking forwards when we try and prepare our workforce for this. So it's thinking about that. The regional inequality is another point that I sort of want to flag up. The creative industries have got such potential across the whole of the UK, and you see so much exciting innovation, so many exciting businesses across the whole of the UK and across all regions of the UK. I'm fascinated to see what the next few years in terms of the work from home phenomenon has been. I know that I think that often gets overblown, and everyone kind of says, oh, working from home means the whole society is going to fall over or awful things are going to happen. But I do hear stories of people who are still working for a company in London, have been doing it completely remotely, completely digitally, and they live in Newcastle or on a London salary, and they're basically working in London. And there's a question about what impact that's going to have on the rest of the UK. Again, I know someone who is working for a digital company in Kensal Rise, who now lives in Prague, and his company said that's absolutely fine. He can just do it all completely remotely. But if we get to a situation where London salaries are competing with salaries in other areas of the UK, but it's easier to live on a London salary in Newcastle and work from Newcastle. If you're looking to go into creative industries in Newcastle and you're seeing a job you can do in London remotely or a job you can do in Newcastle, which one are you going to go for? And there's that question about whether that's going to have an impact on the whole wider ecology of the creative industries over the next few years. Again, I hope I'm being paranoid that it's all going to go back to normal, but that question needs to be asked. And then finally, it's the international competition point. Lots of organisations, lots of bands, orchestras, acts, they've realised they can find new audiences internationally, but it also means there's now much more competition internationally. If you're an orchestra, I'm saying a lot about orchestras, but if I was wanting to go to a concert in London on a Monday evening, I've got 5 orchestras I could choose to go and choose based on London. It's kind of competition of about 5. If I'm wanting to go and watch a live stream orchestral concert, I've got hundreds I could choose from. And it means that the one I'm going to go for probably would be a good quality one, but also the ones who do things professionally, who've got the best innovation. There are some fantastic musicians and musical talents in the UK who've got abysmal digital sort of infrastructure, and it will just be again single mount camera, probably a bit shaky, no angles, no views, and I'll see some international acts and international performers who might not be of the same standard and the same quality, but actually they present it in such a professional, such an engaging way that I actually probably find it preferable to watch and engage with. So there's that question of, if we don't have the right infrastructure, if we don't have the right approach to the UK, we probably might find ourselves falling back internationally. And that isn't just about making sure we're skilled up, it isn't just about making sure we've got the right infrastructure, it's the wider economics, it's 5G, it's making sure we've got the wider digital offering here in the UK.
Thank you, Jamie. Just before I hand over to Helen, actually, I want to ask you a question, possibly other members of the panel, which is something that was raised by in Ali's opening remarks. I'm just mindful that we're going to lose Ali in a second, and it was on that's the point about entry to creative industries. And I'm just wondering, as Ali pointed out, these have always been hard sectors to get into if you don't have the social capital, the wherewithal, the connections, often because of low wage, your wages, the need to pay for your own training, all the rest of it. Has that problem become worse online? Has it become harder to get your break, to make connections? And I'm guessing, I'm asking you particularly because I think music may be a particular case study, but I'm curious for other thoughts, just to try to expand on Ali's point about entry.
Yeah, I think it has. Speak to so many people. I mean, I was hearing a story last night about someone who ended up becoming manager of a very famous band, and it came because he was in a pub with the band. Ended up being in a pub with the band, made that contact, made that connection, and it ended up being a lifelong partnership. I think the creative industries generally they're a social phenomenon. They're a social industry, and the idea that you can do stuff without being in the same room as people, you can just do stuff over email or just over Zoom. You can probably tell I'm really kind of like, I seem to have gone quite anti-Zoom recently. But there is that element of, if you know someone, and it's the same in politics, it's the same in journalism. So many people get their break through, it was often used to be unpaid internships, or my mum did this, my dad did that, he got me this meeting with that person, and that was how I got in. And it entrenches those inequalities, entrenches regional inequalities, class and economic inequalities. And I think it's been made much harder over the pandemic, obviously. But it's the question, as Ali said, how do you give people the opportunities to get in, but also how do you give people the opportunities to make sure they stay? It's often retention is often much more the problem sometimes than entry, because it's all very well giving someone an opportunity. But if they don't have the skills, the confidence, and the wider skills base, then often they feel like it's not a sector for them.
I'm aware that we've got one last minute of Ali McGovern. So any closing thoughts from you before you run away?
I think we should see the positive in what Jamie just said, which is that I think because the creative industries are often countercultural, the power structures that keep people out of other important areas of our economy aren't there in the creative industries, or rather, like, being a bit different is seen as an absolutely top quality to have if you're in the creative industries. Whereas, let me tell you, being a bit different is not always admired in politics, amazingly enough. And other things like the law and, so on and so forth, academia. So I think that creative industries has a massive positive on that. I think the question is, can you enjoy the social side of bringing people in whilst you create some more formal opportunities through apprenticeships or other things that reach out to people who just don't have access to that social bit? And then the bit that I haven't figured out that we really, really, really need to sort is, like, how do you become a junior producer or journalist or manager? And not everybody's going to make it, but how do you make sure that you can have a career? And I think that's really what's at risk. Is it 55,000 people we've lost to the music industry, Jamie? Is that right, over the pandemic? And I think we're at a really big crunch point across the whole of the creative industries. So thinking about people's progression is really important, but that's the bit that I am in the market for answers to.
Very good. Thank you. Now, I slightly engineered the conversation. You're partly trying to, hopefully, to pave the way for Helen to talk about digital inclusion and exclusion in creative industries. So, Helen, you're going to get not the final word, but you'll get the final formal word. While Ali disappears gracefully into the shadows. But Ali, thank you very much indeed. I would say thank you to us. Oh yes.
Brilliant, thanks very much. Lovely to be here. So I'm Helen Milner. I'm the Group Chief Exec of Good Things Foundation. We're a national and international digital inclusion charity that we've helped over 4 million people to cross the digital divide in the UK and Australia in the last 10 years. And we do that through partnership with hyper-local community organisations, libraries, small local charities, and they include arts organisations as well, be that the museum and art gallery, or be it Art Against Knives, or community arts organisations working with people with disability and embedding digital inclusion into that. In the UK today, 10 million people lack the very basic skills to function in our society, 10 million adults. And they're not all old, just before you'll go, oh, that's just your granny. It's not just your granny. In the UK, the reason why people are digitally excluded is almost always to do with social exclusion and also to do with income. So it's 90% of people who are digitally excluded are also socially excluded. And the pandemic has narrowed the digital divide, but it's deepened it. As in many, many other areas, what the pandemic did is it exposed and also exacerbated inequalities that have been in our society for a long time. It didn't invent digital exclusion, but it massively exposed it. I mean, many of you may not have actually really even thought about digital exclusion before the pandemic, and then it was on the media. You know, I finally got onto BBC Breakfast. Yesterday, we published our blueprint to fix the digital divide. The good news about digital exclusion is we know how to fix it. We know what the barriers are. It's skills, it's confidence, it's affordable equipment and affordable broadband connections and data. And all of those things are fixable. And the good news is there's thousands of organizations working with us. I call it a big club with a shared vision because we're all in it together with that one goal. And actually one thing the pandemic has created is more urgency. That we know more about digital exclusion, but also we know now that it's urgent and we really must not leave people behind. Imagine your lives without technology during the pandemic. I think you probably will say it's not possible. So the reason I'm here is because in July, we published this report, Digital Inclusion and Exclusion in the Arts and Cultural Sector. So it's both based on book reviews, but also primary research and interviews with those community arts organisations, but also other arts and cultural sector organisations. And so if you haven't already seen it, then please do go onto the Good Things Foundation website and seek it out. One of the things I found really interesting about the research that we did was that although it's obvious that, and that was all done about the pandemic, so that was about the impact of digital and the pandemic. But although 72% of people who engaged in online performances had usually in the offline world would go to 4 or more performances a year, there was still actually 44% of people who engaged with those online performances actually previously had engaged less than once a year. So it was bringing more audiences into the arts and cultural experience. So the research we did looked at barriers to digital inclusion in arts and culture across 5 different segments. So the individual, the citizen, the audience, the organisation, a community sector, and then society, and looked at the barriers that all of those had in engaging with digital. So a lot of this, as you can imagine, as others have said, was how did the sector reinvent themselves, be able to still engage with audiences online when everyone was locked out and locked down. And that some of the things that already been mentioned about infrastructure and skills, something that hasn't been mentioned is like, what's the economic model? Right? Because actually, many of the people who were interviewed said it's still as expensive to put on a digital performance as it is face-to-face performance. But how do you actually get people to pay for that? Particularly more grassroots, smaller community organisations, and a bit like, as Alison was saying, without being beholden to the big platforms and other people gaining from that rather than yourself. From a very positive point of view, that the research shows that the arts and cultural sector play a really big role in supporting the community. So actually, it's a way in, an introduction for many people. It does encourage people in, and also that the blend of arts with digital was attractive to people. I want to say it wasn't all positive. I think this kind of echoes something that Jamie said. One of the quotes from a theatre producer was that online performances suck the soul out of the experience. And also that quite often, obviously in our charity, people are blending education with arts, with online, and saying that the breadth of experience and skills of the audience makes that really difficult, especially when you're wanting some kind of participation from that audience. Another as a person that was interviewed said that it was also very challenging in the online world because you had to make sure something interesting happened every 20 seconds because the audience behaved like they were watching TV as opposed to being in a room, engaging and experiencing something. So digital inclusion is massively important, and we need to make sure that as we do continue with online experiences within arts and cultural sector, that we do understand that there are 10 million people who are excluded from that. But also that some of the things that we found in the research was also about the power of peer-to-peer, that there was a lot of people saying it was a shame that they all worked out how to do it by themselves, and actually people were doing the same thing all over the country, and creating more opportunity for them to share that experience and share that best practice would be good. And many people within the arts and cultural sector had very low digital skills, and they needed those digital skills to be upgraded to be able to participate. So that as a digital inclusion charity, I have to finish to say that we mustn't leave 10 million people behind. We absolutely have to fix the digital divide, and that within the arts and cultural sector, that it's both an opportunity to embed something attractive for those audiences, but also not to forget the sector themselves and not leave them behind within the digital skills environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Helen. A hand has gone up already. No. I was about to invite people to raise limbs and indicate if they'd like to speak, but you preempted me. So the lady who's now put her hand down,
Yvonne Atkinson, Devon, CLP, Exeter, CLP. You talked about the digital divide. What about the gender divide? Because I can just do normal stuff, but my daughter actually works in the industry, but she doesn't have programming skills, and I think a lot of women don't have programming skills. How important is programming, not just to connection, which is, having the right equipment and connecting it. But to me, gaming, you've got to have programming skills. And, if you're going to create new things, programming skills, and women and girls are still excluded from that. And nobody's mentioned that yet so far. And if we're going to create new industries, how important is programming and getting the programming skills in schools and getting women involved in them in particular?
Thank you. I'm glad someone's mentioned gaming, because I was going to come on to gaming. I think that's a really good question. There are two really good questions you asked there. One about sort of coding and the hard skills and the gender point. To which I'm going to add a third question. I'm aware the panel aren't gaming experts. The third question, which was the one actually slightly raised by something you said there about you have to have programming and coding skills to get into gaming. And I'm just going to ask whether or not that's true, whether you do actually have to be a coder to get into the gaming industry, because actually gaming is now a more a slightly different beast. But anyway, so I think there are three sets of questions there. But I'm going to go to Helen first, because it feels like that's an inclusion question.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to go to Anita and Jamie to talk about possibly other sectors and the gendered experience of entry there. So how can digital industries include more women across the piece?
Yeah. So the 10 million people who are digitally excluded, who don't have the very basic skills, they can't send an email, they can't connect to Wi-Fi. There isn't a gender divide there. That it's pretty much evenly balanced with men and women. But the point about the digital industries, you're absolutely right, that some of the answers we've been talking about diversity already on the panel, some of those answers, but actually this is something that I'm quite often involved with, and that we haven't got better in this country in the last 10 years about encouraging girls and women that the digital industries is a job for them. Something happens in schools, and it is, although other countries like the US and Australia have very similar issues, countries like the Czech Republic don't. So that we have to look into ourselves and say, culturally, what is it that we're doing at school, I would say. And then the other thing that is not so popular that goes around in my head is if we keep trying things and failing to include more girls and women in the digital sector, do we have to look at things like quotas? Not popular, but how do we really break down those barriers and think more innovatively? Because it is something that we've been trying to tackle for over a decade and failing.
I'm going to come to Anita next. Is this a structural, partly a structural issue with creative industries, given that there's not a lot of, there's less formal recruitment. There are fewer big employers who can actually bring in new talent. You're often required to develop your own skills before you can break into bits of your creative industry, and therefore there are fewer levers that can be pulled to alter the gender balance. Is that an issue here, do you think?
I wouldn't say that it's that sort of issue. The way that I see, I have studied gender in IT. I began my academic career looking at gender issues. I think the difficulty with gender is it has this level of intersectionality. So the loss of opportunities overlap. So women get hit from different angles because the opportunity and therefore the encouragement doesn't progress or doesn't allow entry to whatever they're choosing to do, whether it be programming, whether it be it's more the hardcore tech element, I think. But I think there's a reality that women do very much engage with technology, particularly in the sort of digital age. This has changed the way we interact. Mobile phones, mobile technologies, and women do in households tend to dominate the education process of children. But it's getting into the legitimate jobs where opportunities and resources and change can happen. There is a barrier. And I think that particularly is exacerbated in the creative industries because women as carers, as sharers, as teachers are very creative. And so there's often this blurring of what creative is and how can you capitalize or make it an economic part of your life. So women, there's two questions that I like to ask when I'm looking at technology in women. What is it in it for them? So why aren't women looking at the opportunities and seeing the potential? And why isn't this changing? Because it's more than 10 years. It's 70 years. It's a long time that women have been fighting for equality. So is there a question to begin to ask, well, is it about quotas? Is it about 50%? I personally believe it's about opportunity and the desire to allow people to get in, whether they're Black, whether they have disabilities, whether they're women, the diverse populations that we have. I think that's the opportunity. And that's where the skill set issue and understanding what business means comes in. So enabling and allowing women to understand and be brought into that, I think would improve the sector, not just women either, everybody, all people who are discriminated against.
Jamie, it's obviously, you're here to talk about music, not gaming. But first of all, any thoughts on this general point about tech skills and how better to get them, particularly for women? But also, secondly, any thoughts on that the cross-sectoral, cross-industry relations between gaming and say music? Because I think this is something that we've done a little bit of. We looked at this a little bit at the SMS sometimes, and I always think this is something that people in our little Westminster bubble have not realised what a thing gaming is now in the UK economy, because there is still an idea, I think, in our world of SW1 that gaming is sort of a few people in black t-shirts making making little flashy boxes, not realising we're talking Hollywood scale productions with music, with audio, with human interaction.
I always think that gaming and the music industry, I think it's very similar, both because we both suffer from exactly the same problem, which is we're really fun. So when people think if it's something you really enjoy and if it's quite fun, think, oh yeah, it's just the sort of things people do for enjoyment, and they don't actually realise. Again, the music industry is £5.8 billion a year, 200,000 jobs in pre-pandemic, £2.8 billion exports. If you sort of described a sector, not saying what it is, and said, here's a sector, generates £6 billion, supports hundreds of thousands of jobs, exports here, you think, wow, that sounds really, really, really important. And when you say if you say it's theatre, if you say it's film, if you say it's music, if you say it's gaming, it almost people suddenly almost start to think actually how important actually really is that. And gaming, just like music, is one of the fastest growing industries within the creative industries, and it's a sort of place where if we're taking a long form look and saying in 10 years time what the sectors where the UK is going to be punching above its weight internationally, I mean it already is in music, it already is in gaming, but if you look at the trajectory, this is going to be a really, really, really key sector internationally where the UK can be a world leader. And it goes to Helen's point. I think it's one thing to be looking at digital inclusion across the economy, which you should be doing, but the most important thing should be looking at where are the jobs going to be coming in the next 10 years, where are the places where there's the most opportunity for employment, and it's making sure that you've got digital inclusion there at the very heart of that. And I think that's where it comes in the creative industries. I mean, I'm not a gaming expert at all, as attested by my failure to win a FIFA game in many a time. But I don't know the answer to whether you need to be a programmer to succeed in gaming. And I think that's part of the problem. We don't map skill sets very well in the creative industries. I think there's a lot more that needs to be done to be very, very, very clear in mapping what skills are required, mapping what skills should be needed, and not just making sure that's being properly linked into government and making sure that's part of where government's coming from in terms of their skills training, but also industry itself. I think industry always wants to be doing what it can in skills development. Industry always wants to be doing what it can in terms of upskilling its workforce. And to start with that, we need to work out and map those skills we actually need, where we have the deficit in and where we need to be going.
And basically make that map highly accessible and comprehensible to people from an early age, from school, from early school, so that you know that if you want to grow up and become you go into gaming, what exams do I study, what courses do I follow, where.
And it may be that you're not wanting to go. It may be that you've got the skills to work to be very successful in gaming and don't realise it. So some of the best, some of the most effective and efficient people in the music industry can't read music. I know managers who can't read music and are some of the best managers in the sector. You don't need to be a musician to succeed in the music industry. You probably don't need to be a programmer to succeed in the gaming industry.
Yes, but you
do.
I have been studying and working a bit in the esports area, and esports in England, the big thing that we're doing well in is to be the TV, the Twitch, the vocals, the people who run like the TV shows that are the games, where the gaming.
I'm going to reveal myself as the Luddite in the room. That Twitch is when I log on to, I get my screen and I watch other people playing computer games.
Exactly, that's it.
And somebody comments on that, like a football match.
Exactly.
Okay.
So the UK
and gives you money.
And
makes you lots of money.
Yeah.
So the UK is one of the world leaders in those forms of presentation, but we're terrible gamers, I tell you. And the rest of the world is much better. Croatia, Korea, Canada, and I've talked in Parliament and to other people, governments and industry. Why isn't this being addressed? Why don't we have some sort of training centres? Singapore, a lot of other countries are having mobile.
You said the magic word Singapore. Sorry, in policy terms, some of you may know this. This is secrets of think tanks. If we're ever in doubt for what to recommend, we go, oh, they do it in Singapore, and everyone go, oh, it must be very good.
But they also have training for game addiction, which is that's
a different. But
so that's not so nice. But their industry is much more.
And again, so I'm betraying huge ignorance here. You've probably guessed, but can that be a job? Can playing?
Oh yes, there's a story that I have from Singapore. A fellow who had a law and medical degree, looking for work, decided he didn't want it, put an application in for an esports position, doing what they need to do. Changed, threw away his doctoral career, threw away everything, and became one of the biggest esports players in one of the teams that's over there. So a complete career switch. But being able to apply and think, that sort of concentration, memory, because a lot of it's repetition when they're gaming. They have to train. They spend hours and months just
So what you're saying is when I tell my kids to stop playing Pokemon, read a book, I'm wrong.
Well, if you want them to be an esports star, you are.
I hope they're not watching this.
James, can I just say one
yes.
thing that about programming, and this isn't your question, but you don't need to be a programmer to digitize your performance, your art. It's a bit like saying that if you're putting on a theatre production, you're asking your actors to go up into the roofs and do the lighting rig. Yeah, is that typically performances and arts are put on by a team, and so that actually programming is a particular skill that someone on a team may need. If you're putting it on YouTube, you don't need, because you'll be using other platforms to be able to do it.
Yeah, we're back to that. That skills map point.
Yeah.
There are. I guess again, for the distinction in my old industry, I used to be a journalist for a long time. Now the term is content. It's the distinction between the content and the delivery of the content. Is that fair? Or?
Yeah. I think it's a vast simplification.
That's what journalism teaches you. First we simplify, then we exaggerate.
Yeah. So on your other side, not your content side, programming is just part of that.
I've got another question.
Oh, there's actually a gentleman behind you who has a question, and then a lady over here. So we'll try and get back to you. I promise. Sorry, you go ahead, sir.
Hi, my name is Chris from Vauxhall. I work in finance and accounting industry, so I can fully relate to the digital revolution being discussed here. So I have a couple of questions here. So first of all, around DJs and clubs as well, which I think I've not really heard much discussion on. How will this evolve with the digital revolution, given that this industry actually revolves around being together with people and celebrating events and
sorry, forgive me. We've got for some reason the air conditioning has kicked in, so I lost. Sorry, you're right. The question is about
DJs and clubs.
DJs and clubs. Yes, sorry, and something else about which I know nothing. Yes, yes. So yes.
Yeah, how would this evolve going forward, given that this industry actually revolves around being together with people? And second is around piracy, content piracy, which can be a pertinent topic with increasing digitalization and also availability of content. So how does panelists think this issue will evolve, and what can we do to tackle it essentially? So, thank you.
Thank you. Any volunteers to go first?
I'll give a go on the DJ and clubs bit. It's interesting, isn't it? Over the pandemic, I don't know if anyone else, some of you may have tried this when people went, right, clubs aren't open, we're going to try and do a digital virtual club, and you sort of basically like be in your room with some headphones, and you sort of be like trying to act as if you were in a nightclub, and it was just obviously like not. I had a really dark 18 months during the pandemic, but it's interesting. I think it comes down to this question of live experience. Well, people talk about live and live stream and recorded as if live stream and digitized performances are almost a challenge to live performances, but actually I almost see it as it's not about live or recorded, it's about in person or remote. So it's fascinating, Helen, to hear when you were saying you had people in your research saying they thought live streams sucked the soul out of it, and that people needed to do things to keep it interesting. The idea that, I mean, those people would probably be listening to Spotify, and we would not be kind of listening to Spotify or listening to CDs or listening to radio, being like, oh, this has completely sucked the soul out of live performance. But they've almost seen it. They've seen live streaming as an alternative to live rather than just another kind of way of consuming. And the question on clubs and DJs is similar. Are we going to be kind of moving forward in a way where people are going to be looking at digital live stream club nights? I mean, didn't really do it for me. Maybe there were some people who kind of really enjoyed it. But I think it's a question of the importance of the shared experience and the live experience. If there's one thing we learned over the past 18 months, it's the value of the shared experience. And you can find all sorts of alternate ways to try and consume music and have live experiences. But it's only when you're all kind of together and you're having that shared experience that makes it so important. Also, you don't realise what you have until it's gone, and we've missed these things in the past 18 months. I think it's going to come back much stronger. On piracy, content's going to be key in this decade to come, and that means making sure we've got incredibly strong levels of copyright. A lot of the trade deals that are being worked on at the moment, I know we're doing a lot of work to push to make sure that copyright and content and copyright and IP is kind of at the heart of those deals. as we're digitizing more, as we're kind of moving much more towards content, making sure that people can you can protect the copyright and people can be getting value from their content is just is incredibly important. So I think it's one of those issues that is going to become increasingly important over the next few years.
Thank you. Any thoughts from you two,
Yeah,
on piracy and/or clubs before we quickly go on to our friend in the white jacket there?
Yep. I think it's a hugely important issue, actually. And I think it's sort of understanding the importance of content. I've written a book called Content is King. So understanding your content as a creative person is absolutely, in this day and age, the most essential thing you need to do. If you're a musician, if you're a creative in any form, what is your production? If you want to be a business person, what is it worth? Therefore, what is my IP? And creative people, you can't control them. As a manager, I find this is a big problem. You have a band, you have an artist, they love to be on social media, they love their audience, but what does that mean and who is capitalizing on it? They are the biggest questions that we have as creatives at the moment. What is your knowledge? I think the governments need to really get a grip with this, and how much does each individual, each child need to know about this? Because people are losing out, and the value of what is being doing, of what is happening, is just going into the bleed of the ether. So the UK, the individuals are all losing, or it's going to the same people investing from it. That's what I think. So it's vital. Thank you for your question.
Quick thought.
Very quickly. Both in digital inclusion and in the arts and culture research, we do have evidence that we're reaching new and different audiences. So we're reaching people that we never reached before. For example, older people isolated at home who wouldn't go to a community centre or a library, people in rural areas. So I think that for every disadvantage, there's an advantage. But I'm absolutely agree with Anita, and that came through in our research. How do you monetize it? How do you make sure others aren't stealing it? Is really, really important, and often becomes like question number 10 once it's all online and already been shared, right?
Last question from the lady there, I think, and then we'll wrap up.
Thank you. My name's Kira from Stonehaven. I just wanted to ask, and I think we're skirting on the sort of edges of this conversation, but do you think that platforms have provided an answer to accessibility, building media and digital literacy, education opportunities, inclusive behaviours? Do we feel like that is happening and we're feeling positive about it going forwards?
So just platforms, when you say platforms, you mean
social media and entertainment platforms? Right,
and that's a very, very simple question. Social media platforms, good thing or bad? Answer in 30 words or 30 words or fewer, everybody. Helen, you're in charge of the internet.
Oh gosh, it's such a good question. I mean, I think that just going right back to what Alison said, competition's really important. And so that there's definitely positive things that platforms, entertainment platforms, social media platforms have done and are doing to increase inclusivity and accessibility. They're not going away. So, it's a classic. If you've got your big tent, you want them inside your big tent, and they're striving to improve things, particularly, let's say, around accessibility. But we need to have more competition, so that the only way to live stream your performance shouldn't be put it on YouTube, right? That you should have many more opportunities. And because I work a lot with grassroots organisations, more ways in which to grow grassroots, not-for-profit platforms, I would absolutely love to see that entering the market.
At this point, I should say hello to everyone joining us on our YouTube stream, and hand over to Anita and then Jamie for last word.
It is a very good question, and not one easy to ask. I would like to say no, probably more than yes at this moment in time, because of structural inequality. I don't think that technology is particularly providing any deeper layers for those who have existing inequalities to escape it. And I think that's something we have to admit. I think it's a great social platform, but I don't think we quite know how it's impacting on our children, our education. I don't think we know what skill sets are developing. And I think this is why we're going around, and in my opinion, no, it isn't as good, because we don't know enough and we're acting too fast. And then when we act too fast, we just fall back to old rules, and those rules aren't working.
Thank you, Jamie. Have platforms been good for creative industries, particularly music, and the people who work in them? Since we're here to talk about work in the industries.
They have created all sorts of opportunities. And I think they also, when you have conversations with lots of different platforms, they want to be doing more. And it's sort of quite easy to have a narrative sometimes of kind of bash them over the head. We sometimes do that, but often they say they want to be going further, they want to be doing more, and sometimes the case of it saying, okay, what can you be offering? I think to sort of take a step back from it, but focus on the platforms, I can sit and listen to some of the world's most fantastic musical performers. I can make, as we found, hundreds of thousands of pounds from gaming. I can listen to Michael Sandel lecture at Harvard, and I can do it all from my bedroom, and I can do it all for actually relatively low cost. That's created amazing opportunities for me that I wouldn't have had 20 years ago. And I don't think we should sort of forget that. But it goes back to I think the point Helen's been making. It's really easy for me to say there are opportunities I've got through various platforms and digital that I wouldn't have had 20 years ago. But opportunities, those opportunities are ones that 10 million people still don't have. And I think it's a really profound point we shouldn't let go.
Thank you. Well, thank you all very much. We're at our allotted ending time now, so I'm going to say thank you all very much for coming. Thank you to our friends at Policy at Manchester for helping us make this event possible, and especially, hopefully, you'll join me in giving the panel a hand. So thank you to all them for all their thoughts. Thank you.